So let's get down to business.
All right.
You wrote yesterday in the Scoop on your weekly column, this is This Week in Texas High School Football, about spring ball, no spring ball. Now, I don't know how many total coaches you quoted in there. You quoted a lot, at least
about 10? A dozen, I think.
A dozen?
We got a good cross section of the state, too.
You got a good swath of guys, big schools, small schools, different corners of the state, from El Paso to up here.
Houston, San Antonio represented.
You got a good collection of guys, and I guess the first thing I'll start with is a lot of coaches say, and I think the common refrain you'll get is, it's a no-brainer. I can get 18 days of practice. I can evaluate my players in the summer versus 7 days of practice in
the fall,
in August,
extra week in
when things start. It's a no-brainer. You saw that a lot, and I think that is like if you just ask the average person, would you rather have this or this? They would all say, most of them.
Give me more, right?
Give me more.
Yeah.
Give me the extra time. Let me focus on it with my guys. Look, from a practical standpoint, I think there is an argument there, and I understand the coaches who feel that way. But I'm going to say this: what surprised me, and I've always been that guy. That's what I'll say. I'll come out front by start on saying I've always been that guy. Of course, you would play spring ball. Why wouldn't you play spring ball? I believe in that argument. I do think it's a no-brainer. However, your piece actually kind of changed my mind a little bit. One of the quotes that stood out to me was Jeff Reardon Crosby, who said, We want our guys to be able to play lots of sports.
Yeah.
We think that's important. We think it's important that they play other sports and not just focus on football all the time. That's pretty compelling because I think more and more we're getting into that singular focus on one sport, and I do err on the side of let the kids play as many sports as they want to. Life's too short. It's in a lot of cases it's better for their physical health to play different sports and work different muscle groups, be involved with different teams. I thought that was kind of a compelling argument. What do you think about that?
The thing is what I've found is 7-8 years ago, pretty much every 5A and back then it was 5A 4A, but now it's 5A 6A school.
Big school.
Yeah. Everyone was playing spring ball except for your exceptions, probably mostly inner city schools. Not as many participated. In the past 3 or 4 years, I've started to see a trend, slowly but surely, moving kind of away from spring ball.
Right.
And I think obviously it's going to vary by program. Each program has their own unique variables that go into what makes that program.
Right.
For example, my alma mater, Everman, they never have done spring ball.
Right.
Ever. A lot of the reasons are, a lot of the kids, they work.
Right.
And Coach
that was another argument. Yeah.
Coach Keeling says, a lot, Everman's a little lower socioeconomically. These kids don't come from a lot of money. A lot of them have to support their families, and he doesn't feel like it's fair. They ask so much of them during football season to ask them to modify their work schedule for 2 weeks. So he'd rather have the week in the fall. I thought another thing, Coach Reardon, it varies by realignment. I thought Coach Reardon's argument is, hey, we're in a 9-team district, so we're playing district games really early.
Yeah.
That games that factor into our season as far as making the playoffs, we start really early, so we need that extra scrimmage just to kind of get into game ready because we're playing games that mean something in week 3.
The argument for that second scrimmage was the other part of that. A lot of those coaches say, well, okay, yes, you can have the summer to evaluate guys if you play the spring ball, but they only played against each other in your spring game, the glorified scrimmage that ends up being. And there is something to be said for that, right? We've got this week of build-up that's longer than everyone else, plus a second scrimmage. I mean, what else do you need to evaluate at that point? And you're right. He's right. When you have a 9-team district, you don't have a choice but to hit the ground running. You can't afford to work out as many kinks those first couple of weeks. That extra week of practice is probably pretty pivotal.
Because you're from that traditional 8-team district. You play 3 non-district games. You're probably going to have your bye before district, and then you have district games. I wish I would have gotten a response from someone in Cy-Fair ISD. A 10-team district where they have one non-district game, and then they're in district play in week 2, basically.
Yeah.
So and that may be one of those deals where maybe that comes from the athletic director where he's like, hey, we're going to all be on even terms. Everyone does spring ball, or everyone doesn't do spring ball to make it even. But if you have a choice, if I was in Cy-Fair ISD, I would not do spring football. Because I got district games in week 2. I'd rather have the extra scrimmage and be as sharp as I can for that week 2 district ball game. So, we said it. And I think Coach Hennigan from Denton Ryan said it best. There's programs that are successful doing it both ways.
Right. I don't think there's a right way. It's
no.
what works for you.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And it can vary just by year to year. There's some years where maybe you don't have as many multi-sport kids. You don't have as many. I know a couple of schools they do spring ball, but then some years they don't do it. If all their I think one year, one school I can't remember the name of it now, but all their quarterbacks played baseball and they were on a deep playoff run.
Right.
They didn't have any quarterbacks.
Right.
What's the point of having spring football if you don't have a quarterback to take any snaps? So I think that can kind of vary just by the kids you have.
Another point that got brought up that I think makes sense is if you look at you talk about like the last 7-8 years, the difference too there is the growth of 7-on-7. You hard pressed to find a major program, a bigger program that runs a spread offense of any kind, any offense that throws the ball that doesn't play 7-on-7. And I think for a lot of coaches, I think Reardon said, look, they're doing what they need to. They're running through our offense in 7-on-7 for 8 weeks.
Yeah,
with their teammates, they're still doing the team building, together, and they're still able to play these other sports if they want to.
And you got lineman challenges for the big boys, so they're getting that camaraderie going. So I think that's almost a lot of schools, and I know the small schools, a lot of them use 7-on-7 as kind of their pseudo spring football. So
it makes sense.
Definitely see that. But then I thought some of the coaches that were for spring ball, Coach Resendez at South Hills, he said, hey, we don't have to worry about game planning. We're focused on ourselves. We can really evaluate what we do because he's right. During the season, even in non-district, there's a lot of, coaches want to win those non-district games. Don't let anyone tell you they don't want to win those games. They do. They're doing game planning during the season. So in spring, they can focus on their own personnel and correcting those kind of things and really focus on the coaching points. So
and really, it's your coaching style, right? I mean, some guys may just be suited better for having that kind of setup where they can really evaluate guys at a pace they want to evaluate. Some guys may feel like they make better decisions when they're under pressure and they have less time to make them in those situations.
Yeah, everybody's personality is different.
I thought it was really interesting. I wasn't sure what kind of responses you would get. Right? You said, "Oh, I'm gonna do this." I'm like, "Okay, well, let's just see what the responses are." I went from always kind of being like, "Well, I think obviously no brainer." 18/7, right? You want the springtime. And now I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? I don't feel that way. I kind of feel 50-50. I totally understand it both ways.
It was great. I mean, it was the easiest article I had to write because, thanks, coaches. You guys wrote it
all the
for
guys
me.
that quoted.
I just had to quote everybody. So that was the easiest article I had to write all off season. But it was another one was Chad Rogers at Denison. Yeah. He said, hey, I did the math. I can get 9 padded practices in. And the day we have a scrimmage is the day that we've got 9 practices in, and then the day we have a scrimmage, the schools that have spring ball are they're in their first day of pads because Coach Rogers, he said, hey, they still do 2-a-days at Denison. Now the rules are, they have to do 2-a-day one day, and then the next day you don't get to do a 2-a-day, so you have to alternate days. But he did the math; he can get 9 practices and pads in, and so he felt like that was the extra days are nice in the spring, but I can get 9 practices and pads in before the guys who are doing spring ball are even in pads. So a lot of great arguments for and against it. I think it just varies by program. But
I also think part of my other line of thinking when we were originally sort of thinking about this argument and you're talking about doing this article was the 18/7 on its face is not as obvious as it seems. And I think I have to credit the UIL for this, right? Because they clearly put the time in and thought about the rules and in a way that we're just now sort of seeing on a deeper level because, like Coach Rogers said, it's when you actually do the math, when you line this all up, there's not a huge difference. It's just about timing.
Because if you do the 2 practices, you can almost cut that 18-7 deficit to 18-12, and then a lot of guys in the spring, they don't even use their full 18 days because there's testing going on. There's just state mandated testing that's going on.
Guys have to leave for other sports if they want to.
So there's that going on, and then a lot of time, and then you really do count the spring game as a practice. I mean, it's about I go to spring games in May, and coaches are just like they're like I just don't want to get anybody hurt. So they're getting their guys out of there so fast.
If there's even a question about injury, if someone's recovering from anything, they're not even going to participate. Right?
Yeah.
Now, there is a little wrinkle there that's kind of a benefit, kind of a funny side thing with the article. The photo I ended up using was from spring football I took back at Lake Travis, and the photo is of Michael Brewer as a sophomore getting reps because Garrett Gilbert sat out spring football with a shoulder injury his senior year. Those are reps that were probably invaluable to Brewer.
No doubt.
He didn't even, he ends up playing receiver as a sophomore or whatever.
But those reps in practice were critical. Because Gilbert didn't really need the reps. He had been playing since he was a sophomore.
At that point, he was good. Yeah. But, here's Chad Morris saying, hey, Michael Brewer, go out there and get used to our offense as a incoming sophomore, which is there are those situations where I think the spring football could be really beneficial because Brewer never gets those reps in the fall. That all goes to Gilbert, and they go on. And I'm sure Brewer ends up being fine, but I would suspect he would go back and say that was a big deal to him, you know.
And on the injury front, I guess at one point for spring ball, and I can't remember who made the point, but their point is, hey, if we get a guy hurt, we've got time to get him. Even if it's a fairly significant injury, there's still time to get him healthy. So
I think that's a reasonable point too. But I thought it was great. I thought it was really surprising how into that article I got and the responses you got. So thanks to the coaches.
No doubt,
they
made my life easier. I appreciate it. Anytime
sure.
they can do that, because I try to make their lives easier. We try to at DCTF. So
we try.
One time we appreciate the coaches doing us a solid there.